Carl Alexian asks, if you could have a 1-hour lunch with any living or dead person, who would it be? All right, that's such a good question that I don't have an answer for it. And even reading this beforehand and thinking about it, I don't have an answer for it. Because that's such a good question, and there's so many people historically that are fascinating to me that I can't say one is above the others unless I sit down and make like a fucking graph and a flow chart and do statistics and figure out, okay, this person, objectively, I want that one more for reasons X, Y, and Z. So I can't give you a good answer, but I can throw out some names that I know are in the running. So for dead people, you gotta go Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., no question about it. I'd also say Gandhi. I'd also say FDR. I'd also say Malcolm X. I'd also say Karl Marx. And Karl Marx more for the reason that I want to pick his brain because I don't agree with him. And I want to see where he's coming from and see, like more of like a debate or I don't know, a back and forth. I want to dig deeper with a guy like that. Living, I'd go Malala Yousafzai. She's just an absolute hero. She's more brave than me times 8 trillion. Tiger Woods. Obama. I would want to talk to Bush and Cheney to figure out what's wrong with you. I would want to talk to Netanyahu for the same reason. And Noam Chomsky, of course. Now, Noam Chomsky, I've actually had an email correspondence with Noam Chomsky back when I was in college. In my psychology class, we'd spoken about nature versus nurture. And when we had that conversation, the teacher said something along the lines of, I think predominantly nature is the driving force, and then nurture pokes at it. That was her take on nature versus nurture. And I emailed Chomsky. I don't know how I even got his email address, to be honest. Some other teacher who either knew somebody or who had gotten it in the past, he gave it to me. I emailed Chomsky, and I asked him, I was like, is this as far apart? Is this as far off as I think it is? Because at the time, I was kind of like a more typical lefty student, and I was more in the camp of nurture than nature. I think now I'm about 50-50. It depends on what issue you talk about, and we'd have to get into specifics on that. But Chomsky basically said, yeah, I never even understood that debate. And he said, I never understood it because it obviously depends on which thing you're talking about, and it obviously depends on, and it's obviously a mix of different factors, and he basically broke it down for me. And we went back and forth a few times, and I was like, damn, this guy's fucking one of the most quoted intellectuals, the most quoted living intellectual, and he's just having a correspondence with some asshole, college kid. But he does that with everybody. I'm not special. He does that with everybody. He gets so many emails, but he responds to them. It really is amazing. So who knows? Maybe, I'll talk to him again. We'll see. Lucas Simmons says, what are your thoughts on the refugee crisis in Europe? Should European nations give a free pass for all of them? That's a great question. So there's a long-term goal and a short-term goal. In the short-term goal, you absolutely have to make accommodations because you're dealing with many of the people fleeing from Syria and elsewhere. They're genuinely good people who are just trying to survive, and you gotta be human. Now, don't get me wrong. I am in favor of, doing background checks, trying to gather as much information as possible. You certainly don't want to have anybody in here who was a former commander for al-Nusra on the battlefield in Syria. So all that is true. So I'm not fully in the progressive camp of literally let everybody in and do it ASAP and, make it unlimited and who cares about background checks? Well, to think about shit like that later. I'm moderate on this. I'm kind of in the middle where I say you have to be a human being. You have to let people in, especially since we're dealing mostly with just normal people here who are trying to escape a war. But yes, you do background checks. Yes, you do it smart. I have no problem with certain states should accept more than others because there are some economies in Europe that really, they're just not, they have youth unemployment rates of 50%. They're in no place to let in refugees. They just don't have the capability to do it. So I'm in favor of them coming in, but it gets detailed. So, Turkey's done a fantastic job taking in refugees. I think they've taken in over 1 million. Lebanon, same thing. The Gulf states, the Gulf Arab states should take in more. I have no problem with more coming into certain places in Europe. But again, you have to be smart about it, and you have to, be realistic about it. And like I said, the U.S. should take in more as well. Now, we have a system that does background checks and tries to set up, okay, what's going on here? So we have that system set up, and it takes a little while to go through that system. I would keep that system in place, but I would let in maybe 100,000 or so immigrants. But the long-term solution is, obviously, the Middle East needs to get fixed. I know it sounds silly to say it and overly simplistic, because it is overly simplistic to just say it. But Syria, you need to bring the battles to an end. You need to bring the wars to an end, and you need to come up with some sort of solution which has long-term prospects for peace. And, perhaps it requires, as I've spoken about before, basically redrawing the borders on the map in the Middle East and maybe in North Africa to make it reflect more what the ethnic and religious realities are. A lot of the countries in the Middle East are just fake. They're just fake. They were drawn by imperialist Western powers, and then there's weird power struggles that have gone on as a result of that, on top of just, tribalistic problems and religious problems and stuff like that. So the long-term solution is obviously to come up with a plan to stabilize the region. In the short term, yes, you let in refugees, but you be smart about it. It's fine for some places to have caps, and you have to do background checks. That's my overall breakdown. Borgen Stansu asks, in your opinion, what will be the negative consequences of a Republican president after Obama for the USA and the world in general? All right. My response to that is, I don't even really think it necessarily matters if it's a Republican or a Democrat. At some point, likely within the next 8 years, there is going to be a massive economic downturn, and it is going to be worse than the Great Recession. It is going to be worse than the subprime mortgage crisis. And who's in office at the time is going to be very important. I think it's going to happen no matter what, but I think who's in office at the time is going to be important, because you can either go the far right road when you're faced with it, or the far left road. Either you have a new FDR, that would be somebody like Bernie Sanders, who knows what to do, a New Deal, who knows how to re-regulate the marketplace in Wall Street and rein them in, who knows how to make us a more social democratic country. Or you have somebody who's, more of a far-right Tea Party jerk-off, who does all the wrong things, further exacerbates the problem, and we go into the wilderness for a long fucking time before we bounce back. But unfortunately, either way, I see foreign policy-wise, soft imperialism will continue if it's a Democrat. Even under Bernie, he said he wants to keep some people in Afghanistan. That sucks. So either soft imperialism, Obama style, or all-out more wars, Republican style. So it's going to... I'm not optimistic about the future in the short term. Possibly in the long term, we bounce back, depending a lot on who's in office when the crash happens and when the crash does happen.